So I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. So it is 3 o'clock, April 16th, 3 o'clock Eastern time. And so let's go ahead and start this meeting. This is the first of the ArcGIS Pro Parcel Fabric seminar series. And I'm glad everybody's here. Looks like we're going to have a good crowd here by the time we get done. It is going to be a little bit different, but these will be monthly seminars, and it's going to be very different than what you see in a standard type of webinar. So let's go ahead and start because there is an awful lot to cover on this. So Nancy von Meyer, and I haven't seen Nancy check in yet, but Nancy actually helped us to figure out what we were going to do here and recognize that this was a great opportunity for us to go and really talk with more people and get more people involved in this and to help educate people, while we're all confined at home. So I always make sure that I acknowledge her and thank her for that. She's been a good friend for a long, long time. Those of us that don't know Panda Consulting, we're a professional services firm. Esri business partners since 1998. I was actually served as one of the early beta testers on ArcView 1 before it was actually called ArcView 1. It was called Thematic Mapper. Professional surveyor in Florida and South Carolina. I've taught surveying and mapping. Past president of the Florida Association of Cadastral Mappers. Robert, I see you're here. Thank you. Who's the current president of FACM. And then a member of the Florida Board of Professional Surveyors and Mappers. And while we're doing this, I'm also going to have Chris go, and Chris is going to be here. He's also working with Panda. He's actually my son, but more importantly, he's going to be the moderator on this, and he's going to take care of checking on the chat windows and making sure everybody's questions are forwarded to me so I don't have to constantly watch the chat window. Just sort of go over the GoToMeeting interface just so you make sure everyone knows how this works with GoToMeeting. It's a standard interface. Hopefully enough of you have been in video conference here recently. It's pretty standard. There is a webcam on here. You can turn that off if you want. We have a people area here. If you click on this icon here, it will bring up everybody that's in here. Again, here's where you turn off the webcams and such. We then have the people area. We have a chat window, and in the chat window, you can type something down here. At this point here, you can tell whether you want it to go to everyone or just somebody else that you see in the meeting. So you can go in and decide who goes and gets your chats. If you're having any audio issues, if you click on the settings icon, it will allow you to go and change your settings as far as how this all displays. So our goal on this seminar series is to make this interactive. We don't want you to sit there and just have us go and lecture to you. We want this to be interactive. We will try to minimize this to the number of slides that we can absolutely get away with. And we want this to be an event. We want this to be interactive. We want you to, because you're not just participants, you are taking part in this. It's not a webinar. You must ask questions either through audio or chat, and Chris will go and moderate for this. All right. Some of you have seen, most of you have seen the email notices that we send out. We sent them out once a month. At the bottom of that email notice is something to go and subscribe to this list so you can update your preferences here. Or if you really want to, you can unsubscribe to the list and not get it anymore. And all we ask is that you go and sign up, give us your email address, your first, last name, the org you work for, and then what seminars you're interested in. Right now, we have been sending the notices out to everybody that's on the list. And as we go through, we'll start modifying that so you only get the ones that you're really interested in. All right. So with that, let's begin. So the question is, what is the ProFabric? I mean, you've heard a lot of talk over the last 12 years about parcel fabrics and really they're really nothing more than a better and more efficient way to go and manage parcels. And I'm assuming that everybody in here is managing parcels, because if you're not managing parcels, why are you here? You know, you should just be looking at the ArcGIS Pro component of it. And the ArcGIS Pro Parcel Fabric is specifically the next gen solution that Esri's put together. The minimum requirements that you can have for it is you have to have at least ArcGIS Pro 2.4. We recommend above. 2.5 is much better for it. 2.6, which I've been testing right now, is going to make a little bit more enhancements in it, a little bit better. But right now, 2.5 is sort of the sweet spot. We would definitely recommend it, that you use that. So myself and actually a couple people on here, and Keith Forte and some others, have actually, we went out to holistic testing almost a year ago to start understanding what Esri was going to do with the parcel fabric, the Pro Parcel Fabric. And these were their objectives that they had sort of enumerated back then. They wanted to have an optimized data model for editing. They wanted to preserve recorded information. They wanted to maintain topology, allow overlapping parcels. They want to have some way to go and maintain historic parcels, using automatic workflows, and they want to be able to store and manage control points and maintain spatial accuracy. This was their objective, and they've met some of them. Not all of them yet, but they've met some of them to varying degrees of success. And we're trying to go and give them feedback of what they still need to work on and what they don't need to work on. But these were the goals that they wanted. So let's talk about the difference, because there has been, for over 10 years now, there has been a parcel fabric, and it was primarily the ArcMap Parcel Fabric. And the ArcMap Parcel Fabric was basically a structural constraint upon the data. And what I mean by that is that the geodatabase was built so that it controlled how everything worked together and what you needed for what and that sort of thing. The ArcGIS Pro Parcel Fabric is a little bit different. The Pro Parcel Fabric is set up so that if you have a parcel fabric, the software acts differently than if you don't have a parcel fabric. You know, it's interesting. One of the best, I shouldn't say one of the best. One of the interesting things about ArcGIS Pro and the way it manages is that literally you can go and maintain parcels without a parcel fabric. But if you have a parcel fabric, it allows you to do additional things or make it more efficient than if you don't have a parcel fabric in there. All right. And it's not necessarily a structural component of the data as much as Esri talks about this as a controller object. A controller object, so that if it's there, the software does different things. It responds differently than if it's not there. All right. So what is the fabric? If you look inside of Catalog, inside of Pro when you have one, it is this controller data set, and it has some minimal requirements in there. It puts together an object that you see here. It's called a parcel fabric. That's all it is. It's just a little controller data set in there. There is nothing in that thing other than a whole bunch of code. But it also has some other feature classes, some other layers that are required for that fabric. It is connection lines. It is points inside here. There are records, and then there's topology. That literally is the parcel fabric. And then you go and add to it the types of layers that you want to go and manage and maintain. The ArcMap Parcel Fabric was dealing primarily with, and it was focused on the local government information model for the United States, for local and state, local county and state offices, and they had a structure which was defined for the US area. The Pro Parcel Fabric is not constrained that way. It is extremely flexible. You can store anything you want in here, anything you want that's polygon based, because there are some rules in here, and that every parcel type, every parcel type has to have polygons and lines associated with it. And those are the only real rules in there for what you've got. So conceptually, this model is here, where it's a very flexible data model. It is driven by a thing called a record, and we're going to get into that a little bit more, what a record actually is. It is geometry driven. There's geometry associated with a record, but it is a more flexible data model. So I'm actually an old data modeler, and I look at this as like, okay, this is interesting. Let me explore this. So a record has polygons that are associated with it. It also has lines that are associated with it. But it's an interesting relationship between the two. It also has connection lines that are associated with the record. What are those connection lines? How are they defined? And then finally, it has points that are associated with the record. They're not necessarily associated with the polygons or the lines as the old ArcMap parcel fabric were, but where it's actually stored in the attribute table, that this point goes with this line, which goes with this polygon. That's not the way these relationships work. They work more like map topology or geodatabase topology than anything else on here. All right. The question that most people have is, well, what implementation choices do we have? What options do we have? So if you only have a single editor, you can store and work with the parcel fabric inside of a file geodatabase. And between you and me, this is the most successful sort of implementation that we have right now. And we've done about 10 different migrations now, and the ones that really are successful are the ones where the small organizations and such. However, if you have more than one editor, then you have to go to the published web services, in which case you have a master geodatabase with a map document that gets published out to server, and these clients then go and they connect up to that service, that feature service, to do it. And that's where the complexity comes in. And that's where it gets a little tricky, because there are definite conditions on what you can connect up to, what works together, what doesn't work together, what resources are required for that service. We're not going to go into any of that. We're going to go over the fabric itself. We may in the future start discussing some of that, but right now this is just, no, let's look at the fabric, what it does and such.
Frank, before you go any further, Heather in the chat says that she's interested in knowing best practices for when managing multi-story buildings in the fabric. Is that something that you're going to be covering during this session?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it's going to be in this session, but this will be covered in this seminar series. That's a fairly complex, and if she wants, she's more than welcome to send me an email. We'll have our own little meeting to talk about that. But I suspect it'll be several months before we get into that level of complexity. But there are some best practices already, especially how you go and deal with multi-level condominiums, and how you deal with both the stacked polygons, but the stacked parcels, how you map them, and how it's all managed. You definitely want to think about 3D on those so that you can do some visualization on it. But definitely, we can do that. Like I said, since this is the first one here, I'd rather not get that deep right away, but rather let's talk about the fundamentals on this. And Heather, by all means, reach out, and we'll go ahead and take this offline and then cover that in the future with everybody else in there. All right? Hopefully that will help. All right. So in here, again, just the basic differences is the ArcMap parcel fabric was a very complex structure. All the polygon types were stored in one single feature class and then used attributes to pull them apart. I'm actually going to show you that while the ProFabric is a little bit different, there's still a lot of similarities between them. Inside the ArcMap Parcel Fabric, there was what was called a plan table, which had no geometry. It was just a related table that stored information about what source document was used to create that individual parcel. Whereas in the ProFabric, there's actually a separate feature class there called a record that has geometry. Inside the ArcMap Parcel Fabric, there were points, control lines, or control points and line points. Those have all been consolidated into just a point feature class. And there is some complexity built in there that we'll talk about. Connection lines were part of an individual parcel, and they were stored with that parcel. So you could say, well, which connection line? And the connection line being originally in the ArcMap Parcel Fabric, origin connection lines, where you went from a point of commencement to a point of beginning within a meets and bounds description. It sort of served as documentation on spatially where something is related to a corner. Within the ProFabric, connection lines are not stored with the parcels, but rather they're stored in a separate feature class, and they are related to records, but there's a very loose relationships in there. Within the ArcMap Parcel Fabric, there was a check fabric tool that would use to evaluate the structural elements inside your parcel fabric, and then it would create a text file listing all the errors. Inside the Pro, that's all handled with validate topology on here. And then things like joined and unjoined and unclosed and construction parcels, those are all gone inside the Pro Fabric. So within the Pro Fabric, here's minimum feature requirements, okay? You have to have this parcel fabric controller object, and then you have these elements in there. You have, again, a line feature class for connection lines, a point feature class for fabric points, and a polygon feature class that stores records on there. Then you have a default fabric topology, and then you have a series of relationship classes on there. These relationship classes maintain the relationships between, in this case, between connections and records. So when you go to add a parcel fabric, and I'm going to create one real fast for us here in a minute. When you go to create one, you then add it to your current map. It then goes and adds it and puts everything else in there. When you're first building it and you've got your parcel fabric, you then have to go and add what polygon types you're building, and then do additional processes to go and pull that stuff in and wind up building it. There are specific feature classes, and there are key attribute fields that you have to pay attention to when you're working with the ArcGIS Pro Parcel Fabric. All right. One of which is a unique one called a seed field. All right. And there is a concept now inside the Pro Parcel Fabric of a seed. A seed is a polygon which has an undiscerned shape on it that's used as an indication to the controller that there's a polygon going to be built here when you go and do a build parcel fabric. And we'll talk about that more. All the parcels are stored as parcel types. Yeah, that's enough. I'm done. I don't want to do any more of these. Okay. So, Mark has a question on there. Do you want to read that to me, Christopher?
If we have connection lines in our plan parcel fabrics, then delete the record as you recommended earlier, then are those connection lines gone? I'd like to keep the connection lines.
No. The connection, well, and we'll get into that. If you go and do a migration of an existing ArcMap parcel fabric in, it does several things. It takes all of these existing connection lines that you had that were associated with individual parcels and stores them all in that connection feature class. Now, when you go and delete the, the plan reference to it, and this is specifically the default map plan. When you delete that, it doesn't delete the lines. All it does is it clears out the reference, clears out the created by record on there. And again, that's pretty deep down there, but it's one of those questions that we've had during the migrations because we do a lot of upgrades of existing ArcMap fabrics. And when we do them, we always have this because only about half of the people we know actually used plans in the ArcMap fabric. And it creates a thing called a map record that contains the geometry of everything that had that map plan on it. So you want to delete it and get rid of it because it slows you down and there's a whole bunch of issues associated with it. And when you do that, it deletes a reference that's stored in those lines. And unfortunately, we have not found a way to rebuild that reference. So the lines are still there, but they've become orphaned because they're not related to a record anymore. They just sit there. You can still use them, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's a record associated with it. All right, so let's go and open up, and before we do anything else, let's just open up an empty ArcGIS Pro project. And I have over here, this is just a file geodatabase that I'm using, and I have a feature data set that's associated with it. And on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and open up a geoprocessing tool. All right, and I'm going to put it over here just to make it easier on this one here. And I'm going to go to my toolboxes, go down to parcels, and actually tell it to go and create a parcel fabric for me inside this data set. And I'll just call it Pro Seminars on here, tell it to go and build this for me. And again, this is just building that core structural elements in there for me. All right. All right, and we should be done. So now let me go and refresh this here. And when I do that, here's what I see. I see that in fact, it created this controller object, this parcel fabric in there. And then it also created these required lines. It created the connection line feature class. It created the points feature class, the records feature class, created the topology, and this relationship class that said that these connection lines are related back to records again. So on the topologies, if we look at that and actually look at the rules, because we've not done anything on this, this doesn't have any rules on it. It's an interesting thing because if you migrate or upgrade a parcel fabric from ArcMap Parcel Fabric, it has the rules, I think there's 6 rules, that were required for the ArcMap Parcel Fabric. But if you build it from scratch, by default, it has no topology rules in here at all for you. So the different ways that you go and enter into the Pro Fabric means that you get slightly different results between them. All right. So once I did this, my next step would be to go and let's go and put this back here again, go back here to my tools and say, let me go and add a parcel type to here. So here's my Pro Fabric, and here is the first parcel type I want to put in here. All right, I want to put in township polygons, put in for PLSS areas. Now, underneath here is this thing called administrative boundaries. And this is something that's new in 2.5. By default, your parcel types are part of your topology, so that as you go and do edits on them, it automatically validates to see whether or not there's any changes within that geometry. And for most layers that we're dealing with, that's not a problem. But these administrative boundaries are very large polygons. For example, you might have a county polygon that's part of the parcel fabric, so that anytime you do an edit on something that touches that boundary, it would mark the entire boundary as dirty. You know, as topology, if you've got it in place there, anytime you make an edit that in any way touches the geometry, it marks the entire envelope of that geometry as dirty, and you have to then go and revalidate it. So when you have these large areas, it was very cumbersome to have them inside of topologies. And so what 2.5 has done is it said, okay, well, let's make these part of the parcel fabric. You can use the tools in the parcel fabric, but you won't necessarily be dealing with the topology on them and having it mark everything as dirty all the time, and you have to revalidate it. So that's what the administrative boundaries are, is that I'm going to keep that unchecked. I go ahead and run this. And go ahead and finish up. Come on. No matter how fast our computers are, we always want them to be a little bit faster. Patience. All right. So in here now, what we see is that it created for me a polygon feature class called townships, and it created a line feature class called township lines. Now it also created that the record has a relationship, the record feature class has a relationship to townships, and that the record has a relationship to the township lines. So for each parcel type that you add, it creates two relationship classes, one between the record and the polygons and one between the record and the lines. Shana is asking a question, Christopher.
Does the Pro Fabric still contain right-of-way polygons?
And the answer is, if you want to. All right. So there is no longer, again, with this very flexible data model, it doesn't require you to put any one type of parcel in here, one type of polygon in here anymore. You can if you want to, and we have several clients that have that because they use that as a good way to go and maintain and manage the responsibilities within the rights of way, together with the widths of them and the polygons and who, the responsibility, when was it created, how was it created and such. But inside of the ArcMap parcel fabric, the polygons were required because of the way it managed the actual spatial location of the vertices or the corners. They were controlled by joins. Well, we don't have joins inside of here anymore. Instead, we use ArcMap coordinate values for it. And so the right-of-ways are not required anymore, but so you have the option. Do you want to keep them in there or not keep them in there? And Shannon, you and Brian and I are going to talk about that, and we'll get into it as far as how we've recommended that you use the Pro Fabric now on here. So we've worked almost all the way through on that. All right, so let me go and show you a couple more things here. In the townships, in the polygon that's created for this, all right, let's look at what that structure actually looks like. Because we've not done any other attribution on here. We've only got, this is the base attribution that comes with a polygon type inside of the ArcGIS Pro Parcel Fabric. And these are the minimum, this is the minimum attribution that you're going to be getting. Of course, the object ID, the shape field. There is a name field. And again, you should always set an alias for that. A change for those of us that were using the ArcMap, the name field in ArcMap Parcel Fabric was 50 characters long. It is now 255. So I know some of you are applauding because we always had a problem putting subdivision names and condominium names in there, fitting it within 50 characters, and we always had to do all sorts of jump through hoops to get it to be longer. It's now 255, so it's a long one. There's an attribute field called parcel subtype. This is a long one. This is a carryover. I would actually tell you that this one is subject to being removed. It was some of the early thoughts on the original structures of these was that you would be doing a subtyping of your parcels, but right now we're discovering it's not being used much because the parcels are separated into separate feature classes. And usually if we have an existing subtype, it's not called that. It's called something else that gets carried over. Then there's also two other fields in here, one called created by record, one called retired by record. These are key fields. These are key fields, and you should be aware of them. And we'll talk more about what those things are and what they do on there. The next field that we're looking at is the stated area field. This is a field that is traditionally meant to be the area which is located on a deed or that you have of record. This is not the calculated area. There's another field for that here, but it is the stated area. It is the one that's on the deed that's shown. And this one is important because if it's set, you then, the software will go and calculate things off of that. We also have the next field after that, the stated area unit, because in many areas, you might mix the units that you're storing within the stated area. For example, in a lot of assessors offices across the country, they're required, if the parcel is larger than an acre, to list the acreage of that parcel. But if it's less than an acre, to list the square footage of that, so that this automatically comes with this domain, and this domain actually has all of these values on here with acres and US acres and square feet and square chains, and links and miles and such. So it has a preset list of coded values for what unit is stored. So you can mix up larger than an acre. Maybe you want all that stated area as acreage. Less than an acre, maybe you want to have it as square footage instead. All right. So those are stated area units, and calculated area. Misclosure ratio. This misclosure ratio is in fact a ratio that you calculate if in fact your parcel is described by meets and bounds. And mathematically, it may not come back to the point of beginning. That's called a misclosure. And if you take that distance and divide it by the perimeter of the parcel, that gives you the ratio for the misclosure. And that's an indication of how accurately that parcel is either surveyed or described. So it's a good indication for overall whether a meets and bounds parcel is a good parcel or whether there's some issues with it. Same way with the misclosure distance. That distance is sort of the distance of the misclosure. But as I was describing, you can see that only applies to meets and bounds parcels, parcels that are described by meets and bounds. It doesn't go into parcels that are described as sectional breakdowns or aliquot sections or graphical parcels. None of those have misclosures on them. So this is somewhat useful, but not as useful as we used to think it was inside of the ArcMap Parcel Fabric. With the ArcMap Parcel Fabric, every single line had dimensions on it, whether they were calculated or deed. And you're always checking the misclosure distance and the misclosure ratio. No more. No more. You can actually have an entire parcel created with lines. None of them have dimensions on them. but it's still a parcel. It can be a bounded by parcel. We're bounded on the north by the right-of-way, bounded on the east by Johnson's property, on the south by Smith's property, and on the west by West property. That's a valid description. And there's no distances, no bearings on those, but that's still a valid description. All right. Next thing is a seed. Again, this seed is an interesting concept. It is a guide or a way to determine whether something's going to get built or not built on them. And then you have the editor tracking built in here, the created user, the date, the last edit date, shape length, shape area, and the global ID. This is the minimum number of attribute fields on a polygon that's inside the parcel fabric. All right. By the way, this thing that I'm in right now. This is the data designer. 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a deep dive into this and how you actually use this thing. So going back to the line feature class now, what does that look like as far as the minimum that's in there? And again, this has object ID, the shape. And then it has a created by and retired by fields. These are, again, the same. It has a parent line ID. Now this one's interesting because I still haven't found exactly how it's being used in here. But it's a field that's in there. It is not editable by us, but it's in there right now. And then there is a direction field. These are bearings, direction, distance, radius, arc length, radius 2 fields. Notice these are all number fields now. These are no longer string values on here. These are all number fields for the COGO values, to store the COGO values on here. Last week at the Pro Seminar Series, I asked a question for those of us that do COGO a lot, what's missing? Yeah, what's missing? Chris, what's missing here?
What's missing?
Yeah, which field is it?
The chord or delta.
The delta field. Yes,
Yeah.
they are no longer storing the central angle or delta angle on here. I don't know why, but I guess they found it just wasn't worthwhile to go and do that on here. The next field on here is a COGO type field. Now this one is interesting because I think it's a response to some of what we were finding from some agencies where inside the ArcMap parcel fabric, you always had directions and distances, but you never knew where it came from. The COGO type field actually has values in there for I entered this COGO, meaning it is something that I put in there where maybe it was from a deed or something. I entered it from a deed, from a plat, from a survey. I entered it versus it's from geometry, meaning it was inversed when I first came in. That's how it was calculated, because you can actually, there's actually a tool where you can update the COGO values. It can inverse the values and calculate what the directions and distances are, or whether it was computed, meaning I took a parcel, I had the COGO distances on there, and I clipped the boundaries of the parcel underneath it. Well, those new dimensions that are on that remainder parcel, those are now marked as being computed because they are not entered, and they weren't necessarily inversed, but they were computed by calculating the difference between the new parcel line and the old parcel line on there. So yeah, this is an interesting field on the line feature class that's in there now. Sometimes it gets used, sometimes it doesn't get used. The next field is the COGO ground field. And again, this is just basically a yes or no, and it tells you whether or not there's a ground to grid scale factor being applied here. Most of us, that'll be no, but there are times when you can in fact do that. For those of us who are surveyors, you can tell whether or not there is a scale factor associated with this or not. Next one is accuracy. And this is those traditional 7 values in here that Esri has. Number 1 is the highest accuracy, meaning this you're very confident in that, and it goes all the way down to 6, which is the lowest accuracy. And then a 7th one is this one is pure garbage. Don't even bother dealing with this one. Now that doesn't get used at all yet, but with 2.6, we're going to start seeing least squares adjustment becoming available, and that's where those values get used, is in there. Then finally, we have rotation and scaling, and this is when in fact you have directions set and you adjust these lines, how much they get adjusted or how much they get scaled up or down on there. All right. Let me stop talking for a minute and see if there's any questions yet on this. Anybody have any questions yet?
Oh, will ArcGIS Pro 2.6 put the traverse function back on?
The traverse function back on. Not quite sure what you mean by that, Kathy. Like, can I save it? Oh, yeah, you can definitely save traverse files and stuff. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you that here. I'm switching over to another project, one that actually has a real parcel fabric in it. And we'll explore this now a little bit more. I didn't want to get into this whole thing of how do you pull it in and all this other stuff. We'll probably do that in future sessions, but in this one, I just want to go over some of this core terminology and functionality in here. All right, so by default, this is what a parcel fabric looks like when you bring it into ArcGIS Pro. And that I have actually, and let's go in here and look at this parcel fabric for us. So if I look at the properties of this parcel fabric, I have a couple things. I can tell when this parcel fabric was created, what version it was created in, what version of the parcel fabric, and what was the minimum ArcGIS Pro release that can use this. Note that version number 2 requires at least 2.5 to work in it. All right. And then most importantly, it lists what type of parcels do I have in here. And I have regular tax parcels, I have section parcels, I have city boundaries, I have subdivision boundaries, and I have lots. All right. So in here you can see for each parcel type in the default table of contents, I get a grouping of things. I have historic lots, historic lot lines, historic lot polygons. I have active lot lines and lot polygons. Same way with, again, each of the parcel types, I have a grouping for each of them. All right, those groupings are the way they anticipate you'll be using this thing.
Frank,
First,
Kathy is expanding on her question. She says, the purpose I wanted to ask this question is I developed a GUI tool from Python to read the deeds and generate the traverse code for me. So I can just load the traverse.txt file instead of typing in Kogo manually.
Yep. And Kathy, that's a good question. I'm going to go in and put forward into that question. I'm going to exchange sort of go through this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the process that you would normally go through to create a traverse and to create a parcel. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got a parcel fabric in here, and this is my parcels or my records tab. On here, this is called a hub. A record hub. This allows me to control and do things with records. You need a record to turn on some of these tools inside of here. Matter of fact, if you look right now. I don't have a record, and notice these parcel building tools here are not active anymore. But if I make it active, these tools suddenly become active because they now know, oh, if I've got a record, these tools become active and they will help me to go and build my parcels. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new record. I'm going to click on this hub here with the settings on the hub, and I'm going to create a record. This record, we'll just call it Seminar 1. The record attribution itself, really all you need is you need a name. These other fields that are in here, these are less important. Matter of fact, you can even hide them if you don't want them. There is this thing called a record field, and it's not fully designed yet. You can make it anything you want. Internally, we've had discussions about, well, what is a record? Is it the document that created the record, or is it the actions that were taken during the record, or whatever? There's still not a whole consensus on those of us that are our business partners and even Esri. What is a record? We don't know yet, but it gives you the flexibility to call it whatever you want on there. And then there's the date on it. Again, I'm not going to deal with any of this stuff here. I'm just going to say create a record, and it puts it over here. Again, it now knows that I'm doing something with a record. I can then go to my traverse tool, all right, and say, I'm going to go and build, in this case, parcel lines. And I'm going to click here. That's going to be my start. And I'm going to say 45 degrees northeast for 500 feet. And then I'm going to go 90-degree deflection to that for 500 feet, 90-degree deflection for 500 feet, same thing for 500 feet to form a closed polygon. All right. Again, using the traverse tool to input lines that have COGO on them. And this is an interesting difference from the way the traverse tool used to work in ArcMap or even in the ArcMap Parcel Fabric, because you can use the traverse tool to just create 1 or 2 lines. You don't need to create an entire closed polygon. You can use it for just a couple lines in here, and every time you put a course in there and hit enter, it stores that line. So with that, I now have a traverse here. I can go over here and say export this traverse file. All right, and let's just put it on my desktop. Let's make sure it's on my desktop, and Seminar 1, and it will be stored as a text file. If we go into this, there's Seminar 1. So Kathy, to go and talk about it, this uses exactly the same text file format as the ArcMap traverse file. The first line sets the direction type, quadrant bearing. The next one sets the direction units, degrees, minutes, and seconds. The next one sets the coordinate values of the starting point, and then it goes direction and distance, my bearing and distance, direction and distance, such and such, goes and stores all of those out there for you, and it stores them as a text file. You then also have the ability inside of here, if you wanted, to import them in. All right, so it imports it in. Direction, distance, Python code will read, perfect, thank you. All right, so when I am done with this, and again, I've finished my traverse here, so I'm going to finish all the way through on here. I finished my traverse, I draw my lines, and I can now get off of my traverse tool and say, okay, the next step is, and by the way, I should mention right now, because I have an active record here, it is tracking the things that I create and the things that I delete. And it's subtle difference, but you want to make sure it only tracks what you create and what you delete, not what you use. So if I were to use another line in here, it wouldn't necessarily use that or store that. It just says, oh, what did you create as part of this, and what did you delete? So that's what the record is doing. It's doing those two. So now here's my 4
Now,
lines.
Kathy also says she's worried about the curve format.
Okay, I'll do one with the curve for you in a minute. All right. So let me create the seeds. And again, you see this with this little blue thing here. And then I create and build a parcel. And there's my parcel on here. Note on here that now I have not just the lines, but I have the polygons and I have the points that are associated with it. So the build function actually makes sure that whatever is in my active record is going to include all the requirements for a real parcel, which is polygons, lines around the boundary, and points at any deflection areas inside of those. All right. It is different from the ArcMap Parcel Fabric. It just wants to go and track those. And if I go in here to here and I open up the attributes of my record table, and come on, and go down here, to seminar 1. All right. What this, again, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot in here. It's just a polygon that has the attributions that I stored, but it has a shape associated with it. And it has a global ID that right now is being hidden. It has a global ID associated with it. So if I go in here and look at this polygon right now, it will show me, here's my object ID, here's the name of it. I didn't put a name on it or a polygon type, but what was the global ID of the record that created this thing? That's what it stores. That's the relationship class in here. That's a critical um, attribute field inside the Pro Parcel Fabric. I'm going to discard all this. All right, I'm going to now keep editing, and I'm going to create another record. Just test 2, go ahead and create it, and you will get into this routine. Everything you want to do or anything you want to separate, you will create a record on. Now let me go in here, go to Traverse, go in and parcel lines, set my start line here, go and do 45 northeast for 250, go 90 degrees to that, go 200, then go tangent to it, 0 degrees, a radius of 50 feet to the right, and I can tell it 90 degrees for my delta angle. All right. And it comes out back here. I should have changed this here to delta angle, make this 90. Here it is there. That should be coming out as 45 in here. Wonder why it's not. 250 feet. Maybe that should have been 200 feet.
That's better.
Then much better. Then back for my closure again. In this year, this was, yeah, I'm not sure why. I must have this set at a different option here, but it came in, it did close. Let me go and set the closing location so I can calculate it. Right, it closed and said there's 11.44 feet difference. Here is, and let's make it a closed polygon total. There it is there, and it forces the closure for me. I can tell it to create my seed and build it. Let's go to the, oh, sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, it's still there. Let's save this out to the desktop. Let's go in here and we can see here's the misclosure ratio and the misclosure distance on this together with a calculated area. All right, so let us look at here. Okay. Starting point, Kathy, ending point, direction and distance, tangent curve for my tangent curve. Maybe that was because of the arc length instead of the delta in there. That's what it was. I input that incorrectly. And then here's my other two closing forces on here. All right. So those are, again, it uses the ArcMap curve formats for the ArcMap traverse field. We made sure of that as we were doing the testing on here, that we had to have those in place on here. All right. I just put a whole bunch of stuff in here as far as what this thing is actually doing. So let's talk about this. Let's have questions on here. For example, what does a record do? I mean, when I create a record, it only stores, the polygon of the thing that I just created, and it has a global ID. And then the things that I created on that as a result of that record, they have on them the global ID of the record that created it. Or if I mark something historic, example, if I go down here and let's create a record again, and then I go and take and select this parcel, all right, and I make that parcel and I mark it historic, it will go and take that parcel and modify the retired by record on, by the way, I think I just took the city boundary is what I took on here and selected that. I'm sure I did. That's the overall city here, inside of here. All right. This is one big polygon on here. Sorry about that.
Can't you cancel it?
I can, and I'm going to cancel it. I was looking to have a little bit more patience on this, but I'm not going to. I'm also going to, for brevity's sake, I'm going to go and just crash ArcMap here. All right. And recall it. Yeah, this is the one. Okay, so this is the Esri standard table of contents for here. I can tell you one of the things that we have found is that while this does give you an organization for it, it's cumbersome to work with. So we actually have come up with a new design that we go and model after the ArcMap local government information model, in which it puts all layers in one area, puts the individual parcel types together, and it takes and puts the historic elements in the back here. And this seems to be much easier for us to work with, and it's much more logical as far as working with. So just sort of to let you know, the parcel fabric structure right now is pretty much defined, but the way you interact with it is completely open to you. It comes in And once you create that parcel fabric structure, it is completely unconfigured. This is the minimal configurations you can get. And so that please don't think that just even upgrading it from an ArcMap parcel fabric, you're done. It's, and I know Brian's on here. Brian is, and I have been working on one. There's at least 24 different steps that we have already documented that you have to do once you have a parcel fabric to go and set it up so it's a workable element in here that you can go and utilize. I did want to also show you a couple things, and I know we were showing some things in the ArcMap seminar last week, but one of the interesting things is this is the same data. I mean, it points to exactly the same data set in two different map documents, two different maps, and I have the ability to go and link them together so that while I'm in here and working, as I move one map document, the other one also moves. All right, and I've linked the two together on here. And this is again, one of those very interesting things inside of ArcGIS Pro that it's really handy to go and utilize. All right, so I'm going to go back again to doing some edits in here, just so we can see some of these things. Is there any requests or anything that we want to talk about on here before I get started with another demo? Something that somebody would like to see a little bit more? All right, so nothing?
I'll
Okay.
keep you updated.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So let's go and talk about the points feature class a little bit that's in here. Inside of ArcMap, there were several points. There was a line point feature class, there was a fabric point feature class, and a control point feature class. Those have, the line points disappeared, but the control points and the fabric points have all been consolidated into one feature class. And the difference between one and the other is whether or not this is fixed attribute field is yes or no. So if it is fixed in position, it is a control point. If it is not fixed in a position, it is not a control point. It can be moved around freely. Again, that's the way it's designed. That's not the way it's configured, but that's the way it's designed to be used. And then there's other things like created by and retired by, a name field, XYZs, X and Y accuracies, Z accuracy, and the normal modified on them. The edit tracking elements on there are all on here. I can tell you also that with 2.6, we'll be able to go and take a parcel fabric, a Pro parcel fabric, and reproject it so that it can get reprojected and not just have those features reflect the new coordinate values on them, but actually have it recalculate the XYZs on there of that reprojection on there. So with 2.6, there are some new functionalities that are coming out here. All right. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about, do I have any historic parcels in here? Let's just do this. Let me turn off my city boundaries, turn off my sections. So I'm just working on one. Let's create a record here. All right. And let's select this one parcel. All right. And let's take that one parcel and let's mark that parcel historic. There it is. It's the way I would expect it to be, as long as I don't pick the entire city polygon. So I now have a historic parcel polygon in here. All right. And that parcel polygon has stored in it the global ID of the record that created it, and then the global ID of the record that retired it or marked it as historic. All right, so that's the way that the parcel fabric works for whether or not something is current or whether or not something is historic on here, which means that For example, this parcel layer actually has a definition query against it. And the definition query says, for historic parcels, it means that the retired by record attribute field has something in it. It's not null. And that really is the only definition queries that's set inside of here. Same way with historic lots. Retired by record is not null. So if it's got something in there, it's a retired record. If it doesn't have anything in there, retired by record is null, meaning nothing's in there. It's a current parcel. All right. So it's fairly simple, but you want to be really, really careful. What that means is if somebody says, hey, can you give me your parcels out of your parcel fabric? If you give them this feature class here, the parcels feature class here, it contains both current parcels and historic parcels. So you have to set a selection query against it if you're going to go and export this out and share this with anybody, or when you publish it, you only want to publish the current parcels, not the historic ones. All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and discard that again so that it comes back. All right. Okay. So we still don't have any questions. By the way, are there any questions out there? We need to have questions. I have a group of questions, but I want to make sure that we take care of questions that you have today. This is a new way of looking at parcels, a new way of dealing with parcels. It's a good hybrid between just going and building parcels and with what we used to do in ArcMap or what we're now doing in ArcGIS Pro, and actually having tools that help us build parcels on here. All right, no questions. So let's go and build some additional things in here. Let's demonstrate some of the functionality of how you would build a parcel on here. So I'm going to build a meets and bounds parcels right here and illustrate that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a record. All right.
We do have a question from Heather.
Okay.
What topology rule would you use with parcels and subdivision parcel types to ensure the boundaries of subdivisions keep aligned with parcels?
That's a good question. So which parcels, well, I mean, what subdivision, excuse me, which topology tools would you use on that to make sure that that happens? You might have that the polygon must be on, or how would we structure that? And again, if you think about those topology rules, let's look and see if there's any topology rules in here. Excuse me, not here. We have that the endpoints of the city boundaries, for example, of a, let's go to parcels, it's better. That parcels must be covered by parcel lines. Parcel lines must cover the boundaries of these. Parcel lines must not self-intersect, self-overlap, have dangles, and they must be covered by a point. All right, those are the standard ones on here. So if I want to start looking at relationships between subdivisions and lots, subdivisions and parcels on here, I would think about what standard topology rules I might integrate in there. And you want to be careful about whether or not, as you're putting it together, because you want to develop what that relationship is between the two. So can you say that, in fact, a subdivision boundary must be covered by parcel polygons? That's not true all the time, is it? That it must be covered by parcel lines. It's not true all the time because you have parcels that are outside subdivisions together with parcels that are in subdivisions. That a subdivision line must be on a parcel line, possibly, but do you ever have parcels that go beyond the subdivision line? I would say that's a real possibility on there. So I'm not sure you can actually go and define, again, it's going to be dependent upon your structure and the individual business rules as far as how you manage and maintain those parcels. But I'm not sure whether you can use topology rules to do this. And I would sort of turn it around and say, well, do we have existing topology rules inside of our ArcMap feature classes and our ArcMap data structure that go and do the same thing? Because it's going to be the same. It's not like the Pro Parcel Fabric gives you new things on there. It is the same topology rules. So you want to think about it and determine whether or not you have any topology rules that will help you with that. The Pro Fabric and ArcGIS Pro for that point has tools that will help you make sure that there is vertical consistency where there should be, and that's from a mapping standpoint, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can develop a rule for it. So Heather, I'm not sure you can develop a rule that you could use across the board, but at least you could think about whether or not you want to do that and test it out to see whether that really is going to be it. Depends on the individual data structures that you've got in there more than anything else. All right, so let me go and hopefully I kind of helped you with that answer, Heather. I don't think I gave you. I'm not completely satisfied with it, but we'll see if we can talk about that later on there. So Jason has a question. Yes, I saw that. Okay, so
yeah,
you don't join things anymore. You don't join things anymore. Can you show the analogous workflow of generating a new parcel from meets and bounds? And I'm going to go to the next step, and then making sure that it is contiguous with the other parcels that you're putting it on top of. All right. So the workflow is, if you have, for example, a meets and bounds parcel, you first start by saying, okay, let's create a record. Let's put information about that record. Then let's go ahead and build a traverse. And again, we're going to go and put in parcel lines. By the way, an interesting thing on this, whatever type of line you input, that's the type of polygon you're going to build. So the traverse tool, as it relates to the parcel fabric, doesn't use templates. It uses the lines to determine the type of polygon that's going to be built. So I'm going to go in here and say, okay, let's just assume for the sake of brevity that I don't have origin connection points here or anything like that. I'm just going to start at that corner, and I'm going to say, okay, now let's go due north, and I'm putting in an abbreviated format for due north, and let's go 100 feet. All right. When I go and input that in, it will go and put the line in. Now I know if I zoom in here, that is not on the line, and I'm going to have to go and make sure that that is contiguous with it. And traditionally within the ArcMap fabric, I would do a join to do that. I'm going to do something different here. All right. So now I'm just going to do a real easy 90 to that, 100 feet. All right. 90 to this, 100 feet, 90 to this, and 100 feet. And it gets me back to my closed polygon in here. By the way, within the Traverse tool, if I go over here to the options, I already showed you importing and exporting. There's also an option here where you can tell it what your misclosure tolerance is. And if it's within that tolerance, it'll automatically snap it closed. So you can adjust that tolerance for sort of the area in which you're mapping and what you think these values are. All right. So I have created that traverse. Those are the lines that I've used to go and build. I'm going to use this to build this parcel. I then go and take and create my seeds for it. All right. If I have a closed set of lines that are created as part of this active record it will create a seed. If they are not closed, it will not create a seed. So a seed is a good indicator for whether or not your lines form a closed polygon. And it's critical to understand that as you're moving forward. You don't just want to say, oh, just build the seeds and be done. And then the next thing I do is I build this. And with the build, I actually have two options. I can build just using the features that are marked with this active, record, or build everything in my current extent. And both of those are handy as you start moving and building this. But in this case, in this case, I was just going to say build my active parcel. All right, and I have built a parcel here, but if I zoom in here, I can see that this is not coincident with the adjoining parcels on here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the next thing, which is once you create the lines, create the seeds, build the parcels, you then want to go and align that up and make sure it aligns up. Now, this tool is only available if you have an active record in a parcel fabric. However, this tool is actually a combination of two tools inside of Pro. There is an align features tool and there's a transform tool. And if you know those two tools, you'll see where this thing comes from and what's actually in here. So how does this tool work? The first thing you do is you go and tell it an anchor point. Now the anchor point are these points that are not going to get moved as part of this process, as part of this alignment process. So I'm putting it here saying that's where I started from, that's where I want to go. And then I can have it go and generate connections for me and go over here. As I zoom in here, it generates that. But let's say this actually should go over to this point here, and it will show me that's where it's going to move it. Those of us that are using ArcMap Parcel Fabric recognize this is a join. This is where you're telling it where this thing is going to go and such. By the way, normally I would not have told it to automatically generate those. I would have gone in here and done this myself. But it will tell me how far off it's going to be and what's going to happen with that. All right. So I get an indication of how things are going to move when I do this. And the core of this is to understand that the selected parcel is going to move to the unselected parcel. So the selected parcel is going to move to the unselected.
Sorry to interrupt, Frank. Mark wants to know, do you align parcels one at a time or can you align them in bulk? So can you do multiple at one time?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. The answer is you can do multiples at one time. The selected is going to move to the unselected. So in this case, I could tell it a couple things. I could say, well, toggle between my new parcel and the other parcels, or I just move this one at this time. I can toggle between them. Or if I have a bunch of selected parcels, I can tell it move all of these in bulk to this new location. All right. And then when I click align, it will go and move these over to align them. So it's actually align them and move that over so that is coincident with that line where I told it using the link. That's where it's going to go. All right. There wasn't much alignment change here, but this point actually moved a little bit as I did this. It didn't keep that point frozen, but rather it moved it around. And again, usually I don't tell it to generate links because I want that point to be adjusted together with everything else. But because I generated it, it put an anchor point there, and I didn't want to quite do that. But it now has moved it, made it coincident with that parcel so I can get off of this now. And when I do that, it goes and gets rid of that, gets rid of the buffer area on there. So I now have a parcel that I've built, and it's on top of another parcel here. So I'm going to go and turn off my subdivisions, and I'm going to turn off my other parcels on here, and I'm just going to have my tax parcels on here. And I'm going to do this because I'm going to do a clip. Now, when I do a clip, I have two options. One says clip everything that I'm on top of that's being displayed. All right, clip everything I'm on top of that's being displayed. The other option, if I turn this thing off, is I can say, well, show me and select the parcels that it's actually going to clip out. It's going to clip these lines here and here. All right, it's going to clip them. Again, these should be exactly the same. It's going to do the analysis on all of these. I tend to like the simpler workflow, so I just purposely say just turn these other things off, and they won't get clipped. They will only clip the things that are being displayed at the moment. And then I have several options, because this clip works not just for the parcel fabric, but it also works on other polygon feature classes. So I now have, say, okay, let's do a parcel remainder, get rid of the area that's being overlapped and just calculate everything else. I go and clip it. And when it's done clipping it, notice what it did is it calculated this new distance sphere, and it calculated the remainder parcel for me together with this new parcel. All right. A traditional type of, and that's sort of the second workflow that most people utilize. The first is a combine or a merge. The second one is a meets and bounds parcel that you put on top of another parcel. And then you do a clip on it. So with that second workflow, meets and bounds parcel, that you go and you use, create a record, use your traverse tool, create the lines, create the seeds, create the parcel, adjust them, and then do a clip against the underlying layers that you want to clip it from. That's that workflow on there. All right. Any other questions yet? I'll stop here for a minute in case there's any other questions, because then I want to go into something different. Yep. Did it automatically create historic? Thank you so much. So I have historic parcels here. When I turn this on, yes, in fact, it did automatically create historic parcels. And if I click on, I think it is selectable. Let's make sure. My historic parcels, let's make sure they are selectable. So now here's my historic parcel. If I look at my attributes, not only is my created by record calculated, but my retired by record has been calculated. And this is the global ID of this record that I'm working on right now. Good question. Thank you, Jason. All right, so let's turn that off. All right. So that's the traditional workflow that Esri shows you all the time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that there's a separate or different workflow that kind of more matches the old parcel fabric. So what we would traditionally do is we would create, I'm going to use the same record, by the way, just sort of for brevity's sake, because we're coming up on an hour and a half. So on here, I would go and say, well, let's create a new tax parcel. But I'm not going to create it with the lines. I'm going to create it with polygons on here. All right. I'm going to create polygons first, and then allow it to go using the build function to create my lines to go with it and my points that go with it. Again, I can constrain this using bearing and distance and some of the other constraints on here, but I'm just going to go and say, okay, go ahead and do this. I don't need to create seeds because I already have the polygon on here. And just say, go ahead and build this. And it goes and builds it. And I now have lines and polygons for this parcel on here. If I look, I actually have, here's my created by record, and it's the same global ID as the others, which is, and then I could do a clip. All right, I could do a clip against the same thing, which is a really interesting way of producing parcels on here. What happens when you clip that again and you have more than one historic parcel? Does it have a list of historic parcels or just another parcel polygon? It actually creates another historic parcel polygon on here. Let's do a clip on here just to see. All right, do a clip on here. That's the only thing that's turned on. Go ahead and do that. Boom. And there it is there. Let's show you. Here is, turn this off. Here's my new parcel. Here's the new one I created. Here's the new remainder parcel on here. If I click on my historic parcels, I actually have two historic parcels now. All right, I have the original one, and then I have the new one that I never really attributed on here. That's this one here. So it just keeps putting them on top of one another one. All right. So it does just create and stacks these historic parcels on them. Can I
Can
inverse
you
the
inverse
Kogo?
the Kogo in dimensions?
Yep. Yep. Okay. So this parcel right here does not have any Kogo associated with it. Because I used the polygon on it, but then B, I just sort of drew the lines. I didn't do anything with it. So I now have lines here, and I have a tool called Update Kogo. Update Kogo will go and look at my selection and allow me to change my selection if I want. Say, what lines do I have? And allows me to go and update them. And I can update either the distances, and I can update everything, or I can update things that have a difference between something else. So I can say, for example, update everything that's a difference of more than 5 feet. Also with the directions or the bearings, I can update all values, or I can say, well, if it's more than 2 degrees, update it. Otherwise, just leave it as it is on there. And again, this is inversing these, and I can go and it now has inverse values on it instead. So yes, I can go and update those. Interestingly, though, let's go ahead in here to my attributes and look at these. And where did these values come from? They were from geometry. All right. It was not computed. It was not input. These are inverse. These are from geometry on here. So it automatically was calculated in those. So just sort of to look, if I looked at this and I actually had gone and input these values, it says that this Kogo value is entered, this one here, from geometry. So it actually inversed that one. I might not have had that in here all the way. So it is marking what I entered and what it calculated and computed on there from there. So yes, you can go and do that. You can take a whole feature class that doesn't have any Kogo values on it and inverse it for you. All right. So I wanted to show you one more thing before we got here to the end of this. And let me get rid of here. All right, now let me point out something very simple. It may not be obvious, but once you use this for a while, I'm like, okay, I have gone through. I want to do a selection. I am selecting polygons, and initially wouldn't let me do that because I was still on Update Kogo. And now it had an update selector that only had lines that it would select. Now I'm going to go in here. So let's say I have an instance in which I have a legal description that says the north 30 feet of this parcel right here. I have two ways of doing it. I can use Esri's preferred way of doing things and saying, okay, this is going to be what traditionally was called that construct from parent. You go and you take and you do what's called a copy lines to, and you copy it. You're going to build this. You don't care about the attributes on here. You're going to take these lines. It's going to give you a seed, and then you're going to go to parallel, copy parallel, and select this line here and copy parallel to it. You want to copy and you want to go 30 feet, and you want to be on the right hand side. I actually have two lines. Let's just do one of these at a time. All right, do there. I can go and copy that. Then I have to go in here and make sure that these things are extended and trimmed. Extend and trim automatically. Extend it to here. Then go over here. By the way, I made this as a connection line instead. Sorry. Let me go back and do this again differently. All right, so let me go back and do a copy parallel. Let's be careful with what we're doing here, Frank. And I want to do a parcel line. And I want to select this line. I only want one of them. And I want to be 30 feet here. And I want to copy it and put it in place there. There it is there, boom. I then want to go and do an extend and trim here. And extend and trim now has this option to allow me to do it even without it being selected. And I can go and say no. Extend and trim a line here. There it is there. Go and extend that one there. Then go in here and trim this one here. All right, so I've gone and done the 30-foot offset on here and then create the seeds and then go and build this. All right. And I now have two parcels. I have this parcel and I have this parcel. It created the other one as historic, the old one. That is not a very efficient way of doing things. And that's not what we're going to recommend. Instead, what we're going to say is that there is a better way of doing this. Come on. Let's go back one more there, and one more there. Just make sure we're here. Okay, there's our parcel. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take this parcel and use the parcel itself to go and create that offset. So this is the parcel polygon that we have selected right now. And there's now a divide tool. And that divide tool will let us to go and do a parallel offset off of that line for, what did I say, it was 30 feet on there. And it allows you to see a preview. So I could do that. And it automatically will go and divide that parcel into two different parcels. All right, I could go ahead and just make sure it's built. By the way, it already did that. And I now have this parcel and I have this parcel. So that as you use the parcel fabric, you realize that there is better ways to do and create these parcels. And a better way of saying that is that as you use the parcel fabric and the tools, you'll recognize that you're not tied into a single way of building these things. There's multiple ways to do this same thing, some of which are more efficient than others. All right? So some of which are more efficient than others. As we're going through there, we're still discovering ways to make it much more efficient than what it was before. Things such as if you're doing a meets and bounds description, yes, traverse lines, create the seeds, build a parcel, adjust it and put it in place. That's definitely it. But what happens with all of these aliquot parcels? What happens with all these other splits and combines that we need to do? What's the most efficient way? And we are still going through and figuring out. Each of us are sharing tips with one another. How do you do this? How do you not do this? And what's, oh, look at this. I just found this really cool way of doing it. And so there it is. So we're actually past the end of our seminar, all right, for this first one. As I did last week, I'll say, do you want to go any further? If so, you better have a question because I'm almost ready to finish. Do we have any questions, or do we want to stop this here?
Jason says, very helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good for now. Good. Good, Shana. Thank you. We're going to be calling you and contacting you. All right. So there's a lot of efficiencies built in here, but there's not a lot of documentation on how to do it yet. And we are still discovering things. We're still going through this, and hopefully this is going to be a journey for all of us to get to that point.
Mark wants to know if you can remind him where the video links are located.
Thank you so much, Mark. So thank you. So I'm pulling up, this is Panda's website, and you will find that we are going to start updating this in two places. Right now you see the connection for April, and April was the first month that we're really starting this. But in May, we're going to update this again with the new dates for the seminars in May, and you're going to see here's the link to go and join the meeting once it starts, or here's a link to serve it onto your, or to store it into your calendar, and then we're going to be adding another link here for the folder that contains all of the recordings. So the recordings will all be shown on that link, and that'll be included on both the landing page, which is the front page of it, together with, we're going to start having blog posts at least every month, and you'll see the same thing on those blog posts. The reason why we do it in two places, the landing page is always there, the blog changes, but the blog also goes out to LinkedIn and Twitter, and it gets picked up by a whole lot of other places than just the landing page. All right. All right. I'm ready to stop recording. Does anybody else have any other questions on this? Nope. All right, then. I'm going to stop the recording now. And thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.